Karen's grip tightened around the hammer as she faced her neighbor's fence. Her face flushed with rage, jaw clenched tight. After weeks of simmering resentment, the dam had finally burst. She swung the tool with all her might, the impact splintering the wooden planks. Again and again, she struck, each blow fueled by an accumulation of perceived slights and injustices. The steady crack and crunch of breaking wood only seemed to further enrage her. Across the property line, Jada watched in stunned silence, frozen by the outburst. She had always known Karen to be difficult, but this level of aggression was beyond anything she could have anticipated. As the last panel gave way, Jada finally found her voice. "What the hell are you doing?" she shouted, rushing towards the fuming woman. "That's my fence. You can't just—" Karen whirled around, eyes wild. "Your fence is an eyesore, and it's encroaching on my property," she spat. "I'm well within my rights to remove it." Jada shook her head in disbelief. "That's not how this works, Karen. You can't just destroy my property because you feel like it." "Oh, I can and I will," Karen retorted, gripping the hammer tighter. "And if you have a problem with it, you can take it up with the HOA." Jada opened her mouth to protest, but the sound of a car pulling into the driveway cut her off. Both women turned to see Jada's husband, Tom, hurrying towards them, a look of alarm on his face. "What's going on here?" he demanded, positioning himself between the two women. Karen sneered. "Your wife is encroaching on my property with this eyesore of a fence. I'm simply taking care of the problem." Tom's eyes narrowed. "That fence has been there for years. It's on our property, not yours." "Well, I'm the HOA president, and I say it has to go," Karen shot back. "So unless you want to end up in court, I suggest you keep your mouth shut and let me finish the job." Jada placed a hand on Tom's arm, her eyes pleading. "Tom, please, we can't afford a legal battle with the HOA. Maybe we can just—" "No, Jada," Tom interrupted, his voice firm. "This is our property, and we're not going to let Karen bully us into letting her destroy it." He turned to face the furious woman. "You need to leave, Karen. Now." Karen's lips curled into a malicious grin. "Oh, I'm not going anywhere. In fact, I think I'll just keep going until I've dealt with this entire eyesore." With that, she raised the hammer and swung it towards the remaining fence panels. Jada's eyes widened in horror as Karen's hammer came down, shattering the fence with a resounding crack. Tom surged forward, trying to wrestle the tool from the enraged woman's grasp, but she lashed out, striking him across the face with the back of her hand. Tom stumbled back, stunned for a moment, then lunged at Karen again. The two grappled, the hammer slipping from Karen's grip and clattering to the ground. Jada watched, paralyzed, as the confrontation escalated into a full-blown physical altercation. Neighbors began to emerge from their homes, drawn by the commotion. Several approached, trying to intervene, but Karen and Tom were locked in a fierce struggle, ignoring everything around them. Finally, the sound of sirens cut through the chaos, and Jada felt a rush of relief. The police had arrived, summoned by a concerned neighbor. She watched as the officers swiftly separated the two combatants, pinning Karen's arms behind her back and placing her in handcuffs. "What's the meaning of this?" Karen snarled, struggling against the officer's grip. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for destruction of property and assault," one of the officers stated calmly. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As the officers led Karen away, Jada rushed to Tom's side, her heart racing. "Are you okay?" she asked, gently inspecting the cut on his cheek. Tom nodded, his expression a mix of relief and anger. "I'm fine, but that woman has gone too far this time." Jada glanced back at the splintered remains of their fence, then turned to the gathered crowd of onlookers. "Does anyone have a phone we can use to call the HOA?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of nerves and determination. A middle-aged man stepped forward, his brow furrowed with concern. "Here, you can use mine," he said, handing Jada his cell phone. Jada took a deep breath and dialed the number, steeling herself for what was to come. She knew that challenging the HOA president would be no easy task, but after witnessing Karen's violent outburst, she was more determined than ever to stand her ground. As the call connected, Jada braced herself for the next confrontation, knowing that this was only the beginning of a battle that would test the limits of her family's resolve. Jada's heart pounded as the phone on the other end of the line began to ring. She glanced nervously at Tom, who stood by her side, his jaw clenched tight with barely contained anger. The crowd of onlookers had grown, their murmurs and whispers creating an uneasy backdrop to the tense situation. After what felt like an eternity, the call was answered, and a familiar voice filled the air. "This is Karen, HOA president. How can I help you?" Jada took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain calm. "Karen, this is Jada. Your actions just now have left our fence completely destroyed. I need to speak with the HOA board immediately about this." There was a brief pause, and Jada could almost feel the woman's smug smile through the phone. "I'm afraid that won't be possible, Jada," Karen replied, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "As the HOA president, I have the authority to handle all matters related to property disputes. And in this case, I've determined that the fence was an encroachment on my property, so its removal was entirely justified." Jada felt her stomach twist with dread. "Justified? You attacked our property with a hammer. That's not justified, that's—" "I'm sorry, but my decision is final," Karen interrupted, her tone hardening. "If you have a problem with it, you're welcome to take it up with the rest of the board. But good luck with that, seeing as I am the one who appointed them all." Tom stepped forward, his eyes narrowed with anger. "This is ridiculous, Karen. You can't just destroy our property and then expect us to accept it. We're going to file a complaint with the city and—" "Go right ahead," Karen sneered. "But I can assure you, it won't do you any good. I have the full backing of the HOA, and we have a strict policy against unauthorized fences. Your little eyesore is gone, and that's the end of it." Jada felt a wave of despair wash over her. She knew that fighting the HOA would be an uphill battle, especially with Karen's iron grip on the board. But the thought of letting the woman get away with this outrage was simply unacceptable. "This isn't over, Karen," Jada said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You may think you can just bully us into submission, but we're not going to let you get away with this." Karen's laughter rang out, cold and cruel. "We'll see about that, Jada, and I'd be careful if I were you. You wouldn't want to end up like your precious fence, now would you?" The line went dead, leaving Jada and Tom staring at each other in stunned silence. The gravity of the situation had never been more apparent, and they knew that the fight had only just begun. Jada stared at the phone in her hand, her mind racing with a whirlwind of emotions. Karen's chilling words had sent a shiver down her spine, and she couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles were far from over. Tom placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his expression a mix of determination and concern. "Don't worry, we're not going to let her get away with this," he said, his voice low and steady. Jada nodded, taking a deep breath to compose herself. "I know, but she's the HOA president. She's got the whole board under her thumb. How are we supposed to fight against that?" The crowd around them had grown silent, the onlookers watching the exchange with a palpable tension. A few of the neighbors stepped forward, their faces etched with concern. "Listen, if you two need any help taking on the HOA, we've got your back," a middle-aged woman said, her eyes filled with a fierce resolve. "Karen's been a thorn in our side for years, and we're sick of her abuse of power." Jada felt a surge of hope, but then her expression darkened. "I appreciate the offer, but I don't know if that's such a good idea. Karen already threatened us, and I'm worried about what she might do if we start rallying the neighborhood against her." Tom squeezed Jada's shoulder gently. "Well, we can't just sit back and let her walk all over us. We need to find a way to fight this, even if it means going up against the entire HOA. Jetta nodded, her gaze hardening with determination. You're right. We can't let her bully us into submission. But we need to be smart about this too. We can't just charge in blindly and risk getting ourselves into even more trouble. A young man in the crowd spoke up, his voice hesitant but resolute. What if we, try to get the city involved? I mean, if Karen's abusing her power as HOA president, maybe the city could step in and, do something about it. Jada's eyes widened, and she turned to Tom, a glimmer of hope in her expression. That's actually a really good idea. If we can get the city to investigate Karen's actions, maybe we can get her removed from the HOA board and put a stop to this whole mess. Tom nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. All right, then that's what we're going to do. We're going to take this fight to City Hall and show them exactly what kind of person we're dealing with. The crowd erupted into a chorus of murmurs and nods, the energy in the air shifting from one of dread to one of cautious optimism. Jada and Tom knew that the road ahead would be long and arduous, but they were determined to see this through, no matter the cost. The next morning, Jada and Tom found themselves standing before the imposing doors of City Hall, their faces set with a steely determination. They had spent the night gathering evidence and preparing their case, determined to leave no stone unturned in their fight against Karen and the HOA. As they entered the building, they were greeted by a receptionist who eyed them warily. "How can I help you?" she asked, her tone neutral. Jada took a deep breath and stepped forward. "We need to file a complaint against the president of our HOA, Karen Simmons. She's been abusing her power and has even gone so far as to destroy our property." The receptionist's eyes widened slightly, and she quickly began typing on her computer. "Okay, let me see what I can do. Just a moment, please." Jada and Tom waited anxiously, their fingers drumming on the counter as the receptionist continued to type. Finally, she looked up and gestured for them to follow her. "The city ombudsman will see you now," she said, leading them down a long hallway and into a small office. A middle-aged man with a kindly face greeted them, his brow furrowed with concern. "I understand you have a complaint against your HOA president," he said, motioning for them to take a seat. Jada and Tom quickly launched into their story, detailing Karen's destructive rampage and her blatant abuse of power. They presented the evidence they had gathered, including photos of the damaged fence and recordings of their phone conversation with the HOA president. The ombudsman listened intently, his expression growing more and more troubled as the details unfolded. "This is a very serious allegation," he said, once they had finished. "I'll need to look into this further, but it sounds like your HOA president may have overstepped her authority." Jada felt a glimmer of hope flicker to life within her. "So you'll investigate, and maybe even get her removed from the board?" The ombudsman nodded solemnly. "That's certainly a possibility, but it's going to take some time. In the meantime, I'd advise you to document everything and continue to gather evidence. This isn't going to be an easy fight, but I'll do my best to ensure that justice is served." Tom squeezed Jada's hand, his gaze unwavering. "We're ready for this fight, no matter how long it takes. Karen needs to be held accountable for her actions." The ombudsman offered them a small, sympathetic smile. "I understand, and I'll do everything in my power to support you. Just be careful, and don't hesitate to reach out if you need anything else." As they walked out of City Hall, Jada felt a surge of relief and determination. They had taken the first step in their battle against Karen, and she knew that they weren't going to back down, no matter what obstacles lay ahead. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity for Jada and Tom. They spent countless hours gathering evidence, reaching out to their neighbors, and staying in constant communication with the city ombudsman's office. Despite their best efforts, Karen remained defiant, using her position as HOA president to block their every move. She refused to cooperate with the investigation, and even went so far as to call a special meeting of the HOA board, during which she vehemently denied any wrongdoing. Jada and Tom attended the meeting, their hearts pounding as they faced the formidable woman and her supporters. Karen's rhetoric was persuasive, and Jada could see the skepticism and uncertainty on the faces of some of the board members. But Jada and Tom refused to be silenced. They presented their evidence, recounted the events in vivid detail, and appealed to the board's sense of justice and fair play. The tension in the room was palpable, and Jada couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope as she saw some of the board members begin to waver. However, just as it seemed like the tide might be turning, Karen played her trump card. She stood up, her eyes blazing with a cold fury, and announced that she had uncovered evidence of unauthorized modifications to the property, which, according to the HOA's bylaws, were grounds for immediate fines and possible foreclosure. Jada's stomach twisted with dread as she realized that Karen was referring to a small addition they had made to their home several years ago, a project that had been approved by the previous HOA board. But now, under Karen's rule, it was being used as a weapon against them. Tom rose to his feet, his face flushed with anger. "This is outrageous. You know damn well that we have permission for that addition. You're just using it as an excuse to punish us for standing up to you." Karen's lips curled into a cruel smile. "I'm afraid the rules are the rules, Mr. Atkins, and as president of this HOA, it's my duty to enforce them, no matter who is involved." The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their expressions a mix of unease and resignation. Jada could see that they were torn, caught between their desire for fairness and their fear of challenging Karen's iron grip on the organization. As the meeting drew to a close, Jada and Tom walked out, their hearts heavy with a sense of defeat. They knew that the battle was far from over, but the odds were stacking up against them, and they couldn't help but wonder if they had the strength to keep fighting. The next few weeks were a blur of frustration and despair for Jada and Tom. Despite their efforts to fight the HOA's trumped-up charges, Karen and her allies on the board remained steadfast in their determination to punish the couple. The fines and penalties piled up, threatening to financially cripple the family. Jada spent hours on the phone with the city ombudsman's office, pleading for help, but the investigations seemed to be moving at a glacial pace. Meanwhile, the neighbors who had initially offered their support began to distance themselves, afraid of incurring Karen's wrath. The once vibrant community had become a minefield of tension and mistrust, with the HOA president wielding her power like a blunt instrument. One day, as Jada was tending to her garden, she was startled by the sound of heavy machinery rumbling down the street. Stepping out to investigate, she was horrified to see a construction crew descending on Karen's house, tearing down the roof and walls with ruthless efficiency. Jada rushed over, her heart racing. "What's going on? Why are you demolishing Karen's house?" The foreman, a burly man with a gruff demeanor, paused and turned to her. "Orders from the city. Apparently, this place is a safety hazard and needs to be torn down." Jada's eyes widened in disbelief. "But how? Why?" The foreman shrugged. "Beats me. All I know is that the city inspector cited a bunch of violations, and the order came down to take this place down pronto." Jada stood there, watching in stunned silence as the demolition continued, the once pristine house crumbling under the relentless onslaught of the heavy machinery. She couldn't help but feel a sense of grim satisfaction, knowing that Karen was finally facing the consequences of her actions. As the last of the walls came down, Jada spotted a familiar figure emerging from the rubble, her face a mask of pure rage. Karen stumbled towards her, her clothes disheveled and her eyes wild. "You did this, didn't you?" she screamed, her voice shrill and accusatory. "You and your little husband set this up, didn't you?" Jada held her ground, feeling a surge of defiance. "I had nothing to do with this, Karen. This is your own doing. You pushed too far, and now you're paying the price." Karen's face twisted with fury, and for a moment, Jada feared the woman might lash out physically. But just then, The sound of sirens pierced the air, and a pair of police officers approached, quickly restraining the distraught woman. As Karen was led away, Jada felt a sense of vindication wash over her. The tide had finally turned, and the once untouchable HOA president was now facing the full force of the law. It was a bittersweet victory, but one that Jada knew would embolden her and Tom to continue their fight for justice. In the aftermath of Karen's dramatic fall from grace, Jada and Tom found themselves in a strange new world. The once formidable HOA president had been arrested and charged with a litany of offenses, from abuse of power to destruction of property. The city's investigation had uncovered a web of corruption and mismanagement within the HOA, with Karen at the center of it all. It was a revelation that shocked the entire neighborhood, leaving many residents feeling betrayed and disillusioned. As the dust settled, Jada and Tom found themselves at the forefront of a movement to reform the HOA, determined to ensure that no one would ever be able to wield such unchecked power again. With the support of their neighbors and the backing of the city, they worked tirelessly to overhaul the organization's bylaws and elect a new, more accountable board. The process was arduous and at times deeply frustrating. But Jada and Tom refused to give up, driven by a sense of purpose and a desire to right the wrongs that had been inflicted upon their community. And as the months passed, they began to see the fruits of their labor. The HOA became more transparent, with regular meetings and open communication with the residents. The new board members listened to the concerns of the community and worked to address them in a fair and equitable manner. Jada and Tom's own home, which had been threatened with foreclosure, was spared, and they were even able to recoup the costs of repairing their damaged fence. It was a bittersweet victory, but one that filled them with a sense of pride and accomplishment. As they stood in their newly repaired yard, Jada turned to Tom, a soft smile on her face. "I never thought we'd be able to take on the HOA and win, but here we are." Tom wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "It wasn't easy, but we never gave up, and now our neighborhood is stronger for it." Jada nodded, her gaze sweeping across the familiar landscape. "I hope Karen's learned her lesson. No one should ever have that much power, unchecked." Tom chuckled, his eyes twinkling with a newfound sense of optimism. "Yeah, well, I hear she's got a lot of time to think about it, sitting in that jail cell." As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood, Jada and Tom knew that their battle had been hard fought, but ultimately it had been worth it. They had stood up to the tyranny of the HOA and emerged victorious, and in the process, they had forged a stronger, more resilient community, one that would never again fall victim to the whims of a power-hungry Karen.